You're listening to the Doc Lounge podcast. This is a place for candid conversations with healthcare industry's top physicians, executives, and thought leaders. This podcast is made possible by Pacific Companies, your trusted advisor in physician recruitment. I am your host, Summer Gilbert, and I am the Director of Marketing and Branding here at Pacific Companies. And today my co-host is Director of Recruitment, Mr. Mark Scarlatta.
Good morning, Summer.
Good morning. Thanks for being on the podcast with me.
Happy to be here.
So today, Mark and I got to talk to Dr. Mike Lee, board-certified primary medicine physician in our neck of the woods here in Orange County. Dr. Lee, we talked to him about his journey, learned more about his family, and then we kind of got into his passion for mental health. Mm-hmm. He speaks to physicians about burnout, which, is amazing.
Super important these days.
And you can really tell by talking to him how passionate he is about what he does. He even goes out of his way to speak about mental health and burnout. And he really practices what he preaches.
I agree with that. And I think it's so important that, he talked about how busy he was just as a physician and as a father and as a husband. Mm-hmm. But yet he still thinks it's important to take the time to help other people with burnout or any issues from a clinical standpoint. So from physician to physician and helping them get to a better place.
So we are really excited for you guys to hear the episode. So hang on after this quick disclaimer for our podcast with Dr. Mike Lee. And just a quick reminder, this podcast is intended to be an open forum. Any personal beliefs, views, or opinions represented in this episode are that of our guest and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Pacific Companies. So please have an open mind and remember that this podcast is not a news source, but rather a safe and neutral platform for candid conversations. So first of all, Dr. Lee, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So let's start off just from the beginning. What made you want to go into medicine?
It's funny. I think, my father's a physician as well. And part of, I think the Asian culture is, your dad's a doctor. I'm the oldest son, kind of assume that you're going to be a doctor too. It's funny. My mom used to joke, no one's going to marry you unless you become a doctor. I was like, yeah. Great. Clearly I have nothing else to offer. But, it was kind of in my mindset that was kind of what I wanted, what I was going to be. Yeah. But I'll tell you, it wasn't until college actually that I had to make some really hard life choices and really think about, was this really what I wanted, or was it more like kind of what my parents wanted or what culture was telling me I wanted? And so, I had some pretty big events that happened and just really shifted my mind. And thankfully, it came back to just realizing that this is kind of what I wanted. That this is really what I wanted to do, was be a physician.
What inspired you to go the primary care route?
I don't know why. I think the minute I knew I wanted to be a doctor, I kind of knew I wanted to be family medicine. I really appreciated the fact that you get to have, long-term relationships with patients, and that actually I have more joy of sometimes than just doing the medicine part of it. And then I have had really positive mentors in my life who are family docs that really, I looked up to, and I got to see all the things that they did and appreciated all the kind of the relationships that they had a chance to build, and also the joy that they got out of practicing.
Yeah. If you had to go back and choose a different specialty, you couldn't do family medicine. Right. What would you choose?
I think I would have done psychiatry.
Okay.
Yeah. I think people always joke around. They're like, Mike, I think you missed your calling. I think you should have been a therapist or a psychiatrist. And so, I definitely, my dad's a psychiatrist actually. So I think that's where I got some of that from. And then, I think it's just, I find the human mind so amazing. And so definitely probably would have gone that route.
Yeah. So you said your wife is a physician as well.
She is.
How did you meet her in training, or how'd you meet her?
We met in residency. Okay. Actually. So yeah, I rotated through a hospital for my OB/GYN rotation. Mm-hmm. And believe me, it was funny. Back then I was like, I'm never going to marry an OB/GYN. They're all overly tired and they're crazy. And I'm just joking.
Yeah.
But we met on that rotation. Honestly, it kind of started off from there, and we had a great relationship.
Yeah. I know there's like a lot of relationships get formed in that because you're both going through the same stuff, same schedule, and you can relate.
Right. And I have to say that does help a lot because, you know, if she's running late or if I'm running late, we get it. You know, we know that there are going to be some patient appointments or visits or surgeries or procedures that are going to run longer than you expect. And so I think we definitely give that and have that empathy for one another in that way.
Yeah, for sure. How do you balance your time being a father and a full-time physician?
You know, I think that is a great question. And I'll be honest with you, I definitely still struggle with that a little bit because a lot of times, you know, you're so tired from your workday. And this is, I think, one of the hardest things that a lot of physician parents deal with is you just have no more energy left when you get home. And to have to give that for your kids can be definitely hard. And I realize that you really have to be intentional about it. You know, you really have to think, like, you know, plan ahead really. And for me, I'll tell you, there are those moments people are like, oh, Mike, you seem like such a good dad, but I'll tell you, if my kids filled out a survey, they'd be like, no, my dad needs some help. I'm like, great, I'm gonna have to hire a therapist for my kids one day, you know, from my like challenging parenting situations. But I think, you know, the constant I think efforts of trying to find time with them and then just making that time quality and really trying to connect with them, I feel like is definitely one of the things that I'm working on and definitely getting better.
Yeah. Well, but I've really seen a lot of the physicians I've interviewed so far, they have said their parents were physicians and that inspired them to become one. So a lot of times, you know, as they get older, they start to appreciate what you do, and you know, you become almost like a superhero. Like, I want to do that too, you know.
Right. So. Definitely. But I'll tell you, I've also heard the opposite, where kids will be like, oh, I don't want to be a doctor because I see how much my mom and dad are never home, or you know, how much stress it takes on them. So I think those are the harder ones sometimes. Is I've heard that from my colleagues who have had that scenario where their kids were like, I don't want to ever be a doctor because I see how hard you work. And I think it definitely makes you sad when you see that, because you know, obviously we do get some joy from our work, and we love for our kids to be able to see that as well. So you know, I'll tell you, one of the things someone taught me was that, you know, when I come home in front of my kids, I try not to say, work was terrible or this was bad. Like, I try to really make a conscious effort to say that, you know, oh, this was good at work, and this, you know, like, I really enjoyed that I had this, you know, conversation with my patient, or that this went really well. So you kind of, you know, the work isn't just looked at as a negative perspective, that you
Very
actually show them
important.
the positive ones too, right? I'm sure both of you probably do that, have to do with your kids too as well.
Absolutely. For sure. Definitely want to make sure that it's positive for them.
Right.
And I can totally relate coming home, working here all day and being very tired and mentally taxed.
Right.
And I don't want to show that side. So as you said, I try to consciously be available to them.
Right.
Mentally and physically.
Right.
So that I can be part of their lives.
Right.
Not have, you know, my work or my stress take away from being a father to them.
Totally. And I think going back to, and I appreciate you sharing that, because I think one of the challenges we often have is shutting off our phones, you know, or shutting off the electronics, because how many of us do that when we get home? It's like we're in front of our kids, we're like checking our emails, or we're doing this. And I think that's one thing, and I'll be honest with you, my wife and I still are challenged by that, but we're trying to make a conscious effort to really turn that off when we get home.
So I come home at 6 o'clock. I have a pretty strict routine. I come home at 6. Bedtime is at 8. When I pull into the driveway at 6, I leave my phone in the car. Put the kids to bed.
That's a good idea.
When I'm done, then I'll go back out to the car and I'll get the phone.
Right.
Because otherwise, I'm just... Doctors are always contacting me, right? So, you know, I'm constantly checking. Or I only have a short amount of time with my kids, so... As I'm sure you and your wife do, both being professionals and doctors.
Right, definitely. So no, I think, you know, one of the things I've learned to appreciate actually is the driving time, you know, like the taking them to their different activities. I realized like that, and actually I had another physician share that with me. She's like, you know, one of the things I really enjoy are those times when you're driving your kids to their different activities, because that's when you talk to them, you know, and for a lot of them, that's when they kind of share more. And then it just depends depends on your kid. And my son, he likes to talk at night right before he's about to go to bed. And I'm like, go to bed. he's like, oh, Dad, let's talk. And I'm like, this is the worst time to talk. You need to go to bed. But that's his like sort of bonding time, is he likes to talk right before he goes to sleep. So, I think you just kind of find what your kids, where they like to talk and share in their moments, and you just take advantage of those times.
How old are your kids?
Mine are 9 and 12 now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
So one boy,
good
one
ages.
girl, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah. It's really
Which one's the
fun.
oldest?
My son is the oldest right now. Yeah. So it's definitely an interesting experience. So I'm grateful for it, though, that they're healthy more than anything else.
Yeah. So what advice would you give to those med students listening about picking a specialty?
Oh, that's hard. I'll tell you that I would say don't, and it is a great question, because I think a lot of med students feel pressure to pick a specialty sometimes based on the income level. They look at it and they're like, they look at dermatology and they think, oh wow, they make a lot of money, don't have to work as many hours, not that stressful. Or but they don't really think about is like, what is really something I enjoy? What am I passionate about, or what is it that I do? Because I can tell you, some people pick specialties because they thought it was going to be less hours or less joints on the family, but I don't think they really enjoy what they do, So so I tell them, figure out what you really enjoy, like what fascinates you, what interests you, and don't think about. I mean, I know you have to consider the hours, but at the same time, somehow or other, you can make it work.
Or where your strengths lie.
Right, right, exactly. Because the one thing I've noticed is for a lot of them, they don't know. I mean, I don't think anyone coached us on self-awareness, or like really taking. And I wish med schools did this better, was to really get them an opportunity to kind of take a step back and say, before they pick their specialty, to think, okay, what do I enjoy? What are my interests? And then just say like, hey, if you like these things, think about this specialty. If you like these things, think about that one.
On that note, Dr. Lee, if you were a counselor at a medical school,
sure,
how would you sell someone on going into primary care family practice?
Oh gosh, there's so many things. Yeah, I would definitely say, it's funny. I always joke around. I tell people I think I have ADHD adult style, because I'm like, my mind's everywhere all the time. And I think the one thing that I liked about primary care is you get to do a little of everything. So, it's really neat because you get to do some women's health, you get to do some peds if you want to, you do adult medicine, but you're kind of the front lines. So I would sell it as like, it's really that you get to have that relationship with that patient and treat the whole person instead of just one organ system. And so I would sell it as that you get to have that connection with people. And it's been really fun for me because, I get to have that connection. And then once they like you, they're like, oh, I want to bring my kids in to see you, and then,
they tell their friends.
They tell their friends. Right. Exactly. So I think to have that, for me, it's all about trust building with the patients. And this is what when I mentor med students or I precept the residents, one of the big things I tell them is like, one of the things we look, the medical part's good and you're going to learn it. But at the same time, one of the things we need to get better at is learning how to build trust with their patients. And because it's I looked this up and it's really unfortunate, but people don't trust doctors. They don't trust the healthcare system as much as they used to. So, I get it. If you look at the media, what do they portray? They portray doctors as like, we're all fraudulent Medicare people and we're doing these things. And we all get these quote unquote bonuses based on not ordering things for patients, which is not true.
Prescribing because you're getting money from the
right. And this is what they see. So I get why there might be a distrust of the system. So I tell people, if you can learn how to build trust with your patients, it's so powerful. And really, I think that's like the one thing that we need to get better at coaching and teaching actually for the growing upcoming new doctors.
Yeah. I have an interesting question. Well, you see all this hype about coronavirus. What have you guys, your department, been doing anything to prepare for that? Or I know you guys know a little bit more the truth about it than what's the hype and social media news and all that. So what are your thoughts on?
Oh my gosh, no, definitely. And it's funny, I'm in transition right now. Actually, I just resigned from a position at Kaiser Permanente, Southern California Permanente Medical Group. And I can tell you that they're great. I mean, they do such a good job with preparing, and they do a good job of trying to educate the patients. And I think a lot of it goes around education, because, what people read on the blog sites and what they see is just a lot of it's hype and it's fear based, and so instead of really genuine, true education, it's like, like paranoia and fear.
Yeah.
And I think that's just the human mind, right? We always go to that most worst case scenario.
Yeah.
And so I think for people, they really have to think about make sure for people to ask their physicians, look up legitimate websites which have true medical, that are based on true medical facts.
CDC being one of them?
Yeah, CDC definitely being one of them for sure. World Health Organization, all those kind of websites will have the real stuff. Then don't look at blogs or Facebook posts and things like that, because that'll just freak you out, when you read stuff.
So is it prevalent? Is it coming here?
I mean, definitely. Obviously we're seeing more and more cases pop up. So it's hard because, there might be people having it, but they're not tested for it. And then they get over it. So we don't even really know, we just know that it's definitely more dangerous for the older population. And that we just, that's about it. But unfortunately there's no vaccine yet. There's no treatment. So I'm not an epidemiologist or anything like that, or an infectious disease specialist, but I can tell you that I know a lot of the medical groups are getting on top of it and just trying to figure out how to do it. And I'm grateful to live in the U.S. where we do have resources and where we do have things, because I think unfortunately in other countries where they don't have all those things, that's where a lot of the fatalities are coming from. Yeah, they don't have the supportive care that they can give for that.
What are the symptoms that you guys look for coronavirus? Do they mimic something else?
Yeah, no, I that's the hard part. I think a lot of people think it's like the flu, but mostly it's a high fever and a cough. But the hard part is there's so many things I can present that way.
Yeah.
So I think that's why they've had to really look at travel. Have they traveled? Have they been recently exposed to someone from those areas? Things like that. But definitely, and that's why I think a lot of them is just stay home. You know what I mean? And that's why a lot of them are being quarantined when they travel, come back from Asia, or when they come back from different countries where coronavirus is well known to be growing and spreading fast. But I just read last night that actually it's getting less. It's trending downwards in China now.
Great.
Which is great. I think because they jumped on it, but obviously we don't know exactly for sure, but that's at least is what I've heard or I've read since last night.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. Good to know.
Yeah.
I had another question for you. You have been out of training since 2004, so coming up on 16 years now.
Right.
In your 16 years in medicine, how have you seen things change from when you came out of training to today in the world of medicine?
Oh gosh, I think technology, I would say, has probably been the biggest mover. I would never imagine to be doing visits over Skype or, video visits or even telephone visits as we are now. I think that's definitely taking a big foothold in the way healthcare is being done now, is doing it over the phone or doing it over cameras or videos. And so I would say that's probably been one of the major changes that I've seen. And then definitely I would say the change in the diversity of the physicians. I think physicians, that older generation was predominantly male, but I'm happy to see that now we're seeing much more women going into medicine. And definitely the gifts and the talents and the skills that are brought through that are great. And I think it's only making the healthcare better here in the U.S. So.
Despite the fact that technology may have made your life easier, has your job as a physician over the years become harder?
I would say yes.
And if so, why?
I think because of technology, unfortunately.
Okay.
We have access to our electronic medical records and things like that 24/7. So if you're not good at setting boundaries or knowing how to turn things off, you could literally be on your computer, laptop, whatever it is, 24/7, just checking labs, checking patient messages, doing all these things. And so I think because of the way technology's become, everything's come so fast and so easy, it definitely can make it challenging for people who are not good about knowing how to set boundaries, knowing when to turn things off.
Are there any specific types of things that you would recommend for people either coming out of medical school, coming out of training, as they go into medicine? Given your experience, what would you tell them about life in medicine?
I would tell them that they need to have a hobby. I think, and I would say And I think we've heard this many a time, but don't lose your relationships. I think sometimes, unfortunately, we get so busy in our work, we get so busy in our lives that we forget to be intentional about making time for our friends, like the people who really mean a lot to us, or our family members, and then unfortunately those go to the wayside. And then all of a sudden when you need a friend or if you need something, they're not there, or it's just awkward now.
Yeah.
So I realized like you really have to be intentional about having an interest outside of medicine, because what I'm seeing a lot, unfortunately, in a lot of our retired physicians, interesting enough, though that generation where they are retiring now at 65 or older, and they lived and breathed in the hospital. I mean, these are people who are in the hospital 6-7 days a week or whatever they were, however many hours at the night they would stay in the hospital or in the clinics. When they get out, their whole identity was their work. So then they go into this pretty deep depression a lot of times once they get out, because they don't have any outlet anymore. They don't have any social contacts or anything like that. So I would, or their whole self-worth was based around their being a doctor. So I think I would say that that's probably one of the challenges. And I would definitely say more among the men. I think the female physicians tend to retire better. I think they're so busy with so many other things. It's great. But I've noticed this more, especially the male demographic of older physicians when they retire. So I would definitely tell the younger ones, don't make the time. I know you can always make an excuse. I don't have time. But I really believe that if you can make the time. It's just you have to be intentional about it. You can't just expect it to fall into your lap. More than anything else.
You are in ultimate control of your reality. So,
right. But I think what I've seen among a lot of burned out physicians is, unfortunately, we go into the whole victim card, which is hard. I mean, I get it too, because I've been there. Like, I know I've been burned out. I burned out in med school. I burned out in my first couple of years of practicing. Definitely, I know what that feels like. And I think the hard part is when you go into that victim mode, you feel powerless. You feel like I'm just a victim of my circumstance. I can't do anything about it, so I just have to deal. And I think one thing that when I coach some of the burned out physicians, I try to help them remember that they can get that control back, or parts of it back, and kind of go from there. Because I think you forget that actually you do have some control, and I think it's hard, but sometimes you need that reminder.
And I know we're going to have you back on to get more in depth about burnout, but what inspired you to want to be a coach for that?
Oh, yeah. No, it's so funny how it happened. It's funny. Like I said, my second calling was always the therapist. I realized, like, even ever since undergrad and med school, people always were like, Mike, you're so easy to talk to. And they would just kind of vent to me, and I would just listen. And and one of the things that I learned, actually, and one of the unfortunate things I learned in med school, is that one of my colleagues was super burned out. She's had a lot of things going on. And I'll never forget, I think, and again, it wasn't anyone's fault at that time, but I think she went to her counselor or people, and they basically told their response was, you can hold back a year, or here's the number to psychiatry, here you go, and that was a different generation, unfortunately, but I know it's gotten much better since then, in terms of med school and training, but that's unfortunately what we got. And so I'll tell you, most doctors were not the types to ask for help, it's just kind of our pride / the way that we were trained. But I do think this younger generation may be different, which is why I admire them, because I think they're more open to receiving help and support in that way. But I can tell you, my generation, the older generation, it was a little different. So I would definitely say that those factors contributed for sure. But there's so many things I could go on and on. But because of that reason, I realized that we do a great job caring for our patients, but we suck at caring for ourselves. And that's just the reality. Is we're so hard on ourselves, and it's all about, most of us who went into medicine grew up with the culture of sacrifice, always give. And so, I think unfortunately no one said, hey, you need to take care of yourself too. And what are you doing? It was always like a side note, like, you take care of yourself. And you're like, I don't know how to do that. So when someone says that to me, I'm just like, well, how do I do that? And so, that's how I got interested. And then while I was a physician at SCPMG, I had the privilege of being able to be a communications coach. And what I realized, for a lot of these physicians who are struggling with their, satisfaction scores or whatever with patients, a lot of it was just because they were burned out, or they were going through something hard. And so, I realized that, man, a lot of us need just a coach. I think all of us need a therapist. I think that, so that's kind of how I got interested into that whole thing. And then I don't know if you've ever heard of Brene Brown, but she's this amazing PhD social worker from University of Houston, and she does a ton of work on shame, vulnerability, and authenticity. And so if you get a chance, I watched one of her TED Talks, was totally inspired, and ended up getting certified in her work, and use a lot of that, because a lot of us doctors, I think we struggle with shame. It's like, she calls it shame is I'm a bad person, versus guilt is I'm a good person, but I make mistakes, and I think unfortunately, what I would tell a lot of the doctors who are just graduating, I would say you're going to get sued. You're going to have patients who are going to yell at you. I think a lot of us come out with this ideal mentality, like, oh, every patient's going to love me. And
it won't happen to me.
Right. It won't happen to me. But I just tell them, you're going to get sued. You're going to, if you're a surgeon, something bad you're going to have an adverse outcome. As a physician, you're going to have an adverse outcome of something you did. We're not perfect, but it's not about, that's not going to make you a bad or good doctor. That's going to be about how do you grow from that and how do you get better, and I think the hard part is the reason why a lot of docs go into depression is after an adverse outcome happens. I mean, I can't even tell you the negative self-talk is just brutal. It's that I suck. I'm the worst doctor ever. Like I'm so scared I'm going to hurt somebody else, and these are normal fears, but I think it's just a matter of being able to, how do you be self-compassionate, which is kind of where the trend I've been doing when I've been doing a lot of the coaching work around that.
Have you seen a lot of lives turn around from, retraining their brain to...
For sure. Yeah, no, definitely. I think you can definitely help to change the mindset, and I think a lot of doctors just need to have empathy. And I think the hard part is when something bad happens, what do we end up doing? We just kind of hide. We go into this weird cave-like syndrome where we just don't talk to anybody. We don't share with anyone. And so honestly, the doctors that I worry about, we've talked about physician suicide in the past before, and I'll tell you, the doctors who I worry about the most are the quiet ones, are the ones that don't say anything, but you find out the next day that they took their life. Yeah. And it kills me. I mean, it just breaks my heart when I hear those stories, because people will think on the outside, oh, they're so, like, I don't get it. They seem so great. They were this and that. But you don't realize there's this inner turmoil that they're dealing with every day. And they just needed, and sometimes some of them just needed someone to reach out and be like, how are you doing? Like, are you doing okay? I heard that something happened. And I think one thing we don't do, because I think sometimes we don't know what to say. I've noticed that, we don't know what to say to someone after they've had a bad experience or they've had an adverse outcome or something happened with one of their patients. But a lot of times it means so much when one of your colleagues just goes up to you and just says, hey, how are you doing? And I just want to remind you, you're a good doctor. I think that's the one thing we don't do enough, because what happens is quality control comes in and they ask these questions, and of course it makes you feel worse. And so I think sometimes we just need that, and thankfully it's really neat, because I have to give shout outs to the Kaiser Orange County group, and for SCPMG as well, because they do have this kind of peer-to-peer support now.
Oh, that's great to hear.
Yeah, and it's great, and they do it's such a support for the physician to physician, and I really am so grateful that the leadership supports it and that they've done so much with it there.
Yeah, and I'll link that Brene Brown's TED Talk in the bottom.
Oh, that'd be awesome. Yeah,
so that you listeners can just go click on that.
Yeah, please do, and read her books. I mean, her books are amazing for sure.
Has medicine opened any interesting opportunities for you? Just like outside of practicing?
Outside of practicing, definitely. I think the coaching thing for sure has helped a lot, because again, being able to coach other physicians has been really fun, and then physician leaders has been really actually gratifying and enjoyable too as well. And then definitely being able to do some support work with some of the like the nonprofits and things like that too. Yeah, so that I definitely has opened that door. But I think that's the one thing that I tell people is keep your minds open. It's amazing what.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We're not stuck just doing clinical practice day-to-day stuff. There's so many other avenues we can use our skill sets and the knowledge that we have to do other great things.
Yeah. I mean, you guys go through all this schooling and training, and you're so knowledgeable at so much, and everyone has their niche, and why not expand on that and share it and
Right, right. No, totally. So one of the things I always say is talking about growth mindset versus fixed mindset. I don't know if you've heard of the book Mindset by Carol Dweck, but it's that whole concept of grow, like continue to get better, continue to grow. And I think that's the hard part sometimes is when you feel stuck. It's oftentimes because you're just in this kind of like fixed mindset mentality. So how do you break through that and really be able to say, hey, I can grow in this way, and how do I invest in myself so that I can help others? And I think that's where the motivation should lie for sure.
For sure. So I have a question that was from one of my coworkers here. He wanted to know, where do you think we are as a healthcare system in the shift from disease control to preventative care?
Right. I think, it's a great question, and I think that's the battle that I think the healthcare system in America is going through right now. Is really we have to right now. Where's the reward coming from? The payments and the models are basically paying for procedures. So the more procedures, the more things that you do, you make more money. When I sit and I counsel a patient on not smoking, I get like $5. I get nothing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think what we need to definitely I think it's getting better, and not that I think, but it definitely will be getting better, because I realize that people are starting to better appreciate the importance of preventative medicine now, and really seeing that value-based care and going from there.
Yeah.
Your buddy, and forgive me if I'm pronouncing his name wrong, Dr. Michael Geiger, How Not to Die?
Oh, yeah. Michael Greger.
Yeah. Excuse me. He is a physician who I don't think he makes very much money, because he's teaching people how to live longer and even sometimes prevent and cure diseases via a plant-based diet.
Right.
So just as you said, I get $5 for telling someone not to smoke. He doesn't get. If someone has high cholesterol, there's two choices, I suppose. One would be lifestyle modification, right? The other would be cholesterol medication.
Right.
So if you do cholesterol medication, somebody's making money.
Right.
You tell somebody to eat a plant-based diet,
Right.
there's not much there. So you've talked about a balance.
Right.
We'll see how this whole preventative medicine thing comes about. But I think she turned me on to that book, and it's just been amazing for me.
Oh yeah,
Personally, just really, really amazing. And we'll see how this goes forward in medicine, because hospitals have to make money.
Right, exactly. And then it goes back to how many procedures, how many films, how many things, and I think that's the challenge, unfortunately, that we have to deal with. And I do think that it's going to be very interesting to see where the healthcare costs go, because I think, not to say that there's not an importance in the administrative work, but so much of our costs go towards administrative work versus actual healthcare that I definitely think that that's going to have to get better too as well. So it's scary, I think, in regards to the future of healthcare. And this is where actually, I'll be honest with you, that I appreciated working for Kaiser Permanente, was that they really do push preventative medicine, and that they really push those aspects. But at the end of the day, it's still you're still have to come to the bigger system, and that bigger system, if you think about who gets paid more, it's going to be the specialists that do more of the procedures. It's not going to be the primary care doc that sits with the patient and listens to them and deals with their depression and anxiety and all their other, the diet issues and lifestyle changes that will actually hopefully prevent them from having to get those procedures, which will actually save the healthcare system money. So I think that's I do believe that bigger systems are figuring that out, but I do think that Kaiser has a head start in that.
That's
sure.
great.
Yeah, and systems like that too.
Do we have time for one more question?
Yeah. A couple more.
So as a physician recruitment firm, we naturally work with a lot of family medicine physicians.
Right.
And as you might be aware, huge demand.
Sure.
It's a huge demand.
Right.
Probably, I would say in this office, it's the number one of all the could we do all specialties nationwide?
Right.
Okay. Family medicine is probably the one specialty we have the most of. Okay. So if you're a third year family medicine resident, Dr. Lee, you're getting bombarded.
Right.
With recruiters, okay? Jobs.
Right.
Some of these jobs are paying money that I think maybe a general surgeon can make, okay? That's where we're at now.
Right.
Again, given your experience as a family medicine physician, what job search advice would you give to a third-year family medicine resident in this market today?
Right. That's a great question because I think that everyone's different, and so what I would ask them to ask themselves is what's most important to them right now? Is it the money? Is it the salary? Because with that great pay is going to come, you may have to live in the middle of some very rural area and work a lot of hours, or is it going to be time? So you may not make as much money, but you'll actually have maybe more time, and one of the transitions why I actually, moved on and moving and joining another group that's called One Medical is that they do offer a little more time, and so I think it's just a matter of where you are in your life stage sometimes. Because I know when I first finished med school, money was it because I had a lot of school loans to pay back. So, that was kind of where I was leaning towards. So what I would ask people is ask themselves what's important to them right now. What's their priority, and also really look into the culture of the group. And that's why I'm excited because I really the group I'm joining is called One Medical, and I really appreciate the culture that they have. And so far, what the physicians that I've met there are amazing. The leaders I've met, I gel with really well. It was funny when I first interviewed with them, I had to laugh because she was like, "Oh, we love Brene Brown here," and I was like, "Oh my gosh, you had me at that." And so I was like, it's like that Jerry Maguire scene, So, but I think I would tell them definitely not just think about the money, but also think about the culture of the group. And, because, at the end of the day, the money is great, but it only makes you happy for so long. It's only going to sustain that for so long.
We learned before we started with this podcast that when you came out of your residency, you worked rural and were in the National Health Service Corps to pay down some loans.
Right, exactly. And I really enjoyed working with that underserved population.
And as at Pacific companies, yes, we're physician recruiters, but we also think of ourselves as consultants. Right. Okay. So what we're trying to do, very much like you might want to do with a new patient, is assess the patient, ask questions, do an H&P, do tests. The medical evidence will tell you what the treatment plan should be. We try to use that same type of a formula when we're working with residents or any physician, really. Right. Okay. But one of the things that struck me when you said that you went from UCLA up to Fraser Park, I believe.
Yes.
For your National Health Service Corps to help pay down some of your student loans.
Right.
We try to have that conversation with a lot of people. Most physicians, especially in our opinion, young physicians coming out of training, location is the number one driver.
Sure.
Sometimes the money would be because I have 3, 4, 5. I'm working with an OBGYN resident right now, $600,000.
Wow.
In student loans. So is the priority to live on the beach in California with our cost of living and our taxes and your debt?
Right.
Or would it be better to initially work in some place like Fraser Park?
Right.
Help pay down your loans, be in a better position financially, and then move to where you want to be. So it was just very interesting for us to hear you say that you took that route. You wanted to pay down some of your loans, and not only did you get your loans paid down, but you also shared with us prior to this podcast that you had a very good experience in Fraser Park.
Right. Fraser Park and Lamont and those areas down in there. And I worked for a great community health center called Clinica Sierra Vista there in the Central Valley. And it was a phenomenal experience because straight out of residency, you're freaking out. You're like, oh my gosh, I'm by myself, And I have to say the nice thing was I actually had a chance to work with other doctors in the clinic that I could always, curbside things with. But more importantly, it was, when I first signed up for the National Service Corps, I actually really wanted to work with the underserved populations. Oh, okay. Yeah, so that was kind of actually my primary driver for that. Okay. And then kind of got involved with just wanting to stay in California. Because initially I was like, oh, maybe I'll go to Alaska, maybe I'll go to some rural area. And then, I met my wife during training, and we knew we weren't going to be happy in an area where we didn't have some family support or something like that. So thankfully my parents are here in California. Especially once we started having kids, it was such a huge help to have them around. And so one of the things that I definitely considered was being able to do that. And like you said, the learning was amazing. I mean, you learn, your learning curve is exponential when you get out of training, and then especially working in an underserved area where these patients have no access to specialists and things like that. I'll never forget, I remember calling my friends who were specialists and being like, I would never manage this outside of this area, but like, what do I do? And I was prescribing things I would never prescribe, but it was but it was an amazing experience, and I really enjoyed it. And I'll tell you, the one thing I really enjoyed was the patients were so appreciative. I mean, like I shared with you before, they're so grateful. I mean, they're like, they're so grateful that you're there and you're providing care for them. And I remember they would come in with like baskets of fruit, because a lot of them were migrant farm workers. And so, coming in with like, and I just was really, it just really brought gratification for me as a physician.
And correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, it seems like we're going towards the direction of giving med students advice to maybe try a rural position right out of school. First of all, maybe expand your skills. But a lot of these rural areas pay really well. Isn't that right?
I have a position now in rural Midwest where they're offering $200,000 just for a sign-on bonus.
Yeah, right, because they can't get anyone else out there, right?
But I think beyond that is, yes, they want to attract someone's attention, but they also are offering that high of a sign-on bonus to also help people with their loans.
Right.
Okay, come and help us here. We'll help you with your loans. I don't want to get too much into it, but the healthcare system I work with is amazing. They're really good people. They really care about compassion and quality care, as opposed to just having anyone go up there and treat these patients. But that's where we are with family medicine these days. That's how competitive it is. And I couldn't even tell you how many email messages on a daily basis a third-year family medicine resident right now is getting. I don't even know. It's got to be mind-boggling. So at some point, I do actually feel compassion for the people that I work with, because I know they're getting bombarded. How do you make sense of all of this stuff coming at you while you're trying to finish your training, on top of maybe they've got a home life with kids and spouses, significant others? How do you manage all of this at once? It has to be overwhelming. And some of the work that we're trying to do is to try to educate people coming out of training, regardless of specialty, on how to navigate
contracts and all the different
the questions you should be asking, what you should be looking for, the facts that you need to get, the questions you need to ask to get the details. You're a doctor, you deal in facts. You don't look at a patient and say, you need to have your gallbladder taken out. Okay? You need to get some facts before you get to that. Same thing with a job search. You need to get the facts to tell you if this is the right treatment plan for you.
Right. No, I can't tell you how helpful that is, because I think a lot of people, they don't teach you this stuff in medical school. So, you come out and you're sort of a victim to whatever is thrown at you. And then it's easy to succumb to something because it looks flashy. And I can tell you, multiple of my colleagues who took those jobs hated it and totally left after a year realizing it was not what they expected. And because I think they didn't have the guidance that you provide, asking about contracts. What should I ask about malpractice? What should I ask about a tail? What should no one taught them that stuff, So I think that that's such a gift that you do for the docs that you're supporting, because that definitely is something that I wish even I had more of when I first finished.
We take this very seriously, Dr. Lee. As a permanent recruiter at Pacific Companies, I'm not moving anywhere. But I might be trying to talk someone to move from California to rural Minnesota. Okay, I don't take that lightly. So we just need to get the facts. And again, we are recruiters, but a lot of us consider ourselves consultants. Hey, let's put the job aside and let's talk about you and what's really important to you. Okay, and then we can go from there.
No, I think that's great, because I think sometimes, honestly, I hate to say it, but I think a lot of us get so fixed on the income part of it, the money part of it, and I'm sure you've seen that, where that's what they're just focused on, but they don't see the bigger picture, and I think that's great that you make them think about that stuff.
I think we have to. I mean, listen, they make whatever they make in 50,000 or whatever it is, and as a third-year family medicine resident in this case. Okay, so to see someone offer, 250, 260, maybe even more in some more rural locations, that tends to get anybody's attention, right? It would me. It would me. But let's take a look, just like you would with your patient. Let's take a look at the whole. So if someone says, I've got a pain in my side, you don't just focus on the side. You're going to do an H&P to get the big picture. This is the same type of thing. We're trying to get the H&P, so to speak, from them to help them formulate the best treatment plan.
Right. No, I think that's great, and it's nice. And that, actually, I'll tell you, that's actually what you're doing is you're kind of coaching somebody.
Yeah.
Essentially. Yeah. No, definitely, because I realized that that's one thing that helped me actually as I got certified in coaching, and how I even approach talking to my colleagues and especially my patients. Because I think a lot of times what we realize we give too much advice. Like you should do this, you should exercise 30 minutes a day, you should eat this kind of diet. But what I realized, and the beauty of what I appreciate, what I learned from coaching and going through that training, is learning to ask the right questions. Because really, it's not the coaching perspective is not me telling you what to do. But the coaching perspective is more getting you to figure that it's already in you. My goal as your coach is to get it out of you, to bring it out of you. And what works for me is going to not work for you, and vice versa. So and that's why I love all these wellness people who push the diets and the exercise and all that. But I realize for some people, physically it is wellness, but but the psychological component is not being addressed. So I think what we realize that hey, running 5 miles a day works for you. I hate running. I put on my tennis shoes and I start sweating. So I realize it's not for everyone. And I hate to say it, I love meat. And I'm plant-based diet is good, and I definitely will probably will help me live a little longer. But that isn't always going to make me more well mentally or emotionally. So I think everyone, it works for everyone's different, and we have to get over the fact that what works I think a lot of people go with the assumption that hey, it worked for me, it'll work for you. But we have to stop doing that. That's actually what part of coaching taught me, was learning not to make those kind of assumptions and judgments.
Isn't it? A lot of it, everything stems from your mindset. Didn't they do some trials where they told some cancer patients that they didn't have something where it would make them think positively, right? And then the ones that got a bad diagnosis, thought negatively, they got more sick, right? And then the ones who had positive information got better. Right. And it's all psychological.
Yeah, there is a huge connection, and it's hard to know, is that because of behaviors that arise from that psychological mindset, or is it that there is something different about what gets released, right, neurotransmitters or whatever that might be with that. So I'm a big fan of positive psychology. I think that there is a lot of positive benefit to that, and I try to coach that definitely in when I work with people.
There's the inner psychiatrist coming out now.
Right. I know. It's like I know what you're thinking even before you say it.
So I have one more question for you. Sure. So this is one, when we're talking about med students, we like to ask, because this is not taught in training, what financial advice would you give a med student that's just about to go out into the physician career world?
Right. Oh, there's so many things I would love to tell them, and I would tell them, it's funny, I do a personal finance talk for the residents,
that's great.
Yeah, it's fun.
I'm asking the right person.
Yeah, cause it's just funny. It's funny because it's all the things I wish someone had taught me before when I was in residency training. And the hard part, because, when you get out as a physician, you get bombarded with all these financial planners, because they know now you're a doctor, you're a high income earner. So now they surround you with all these things. And so it's funny, I always tell the docs, do not, nothing against people who have timeshares, but don't do timeshares. I always tell them, that's the one thing, don't get suckered into timeshares. And I always tell them, you have to make sure that you take care of your insurances, whether it be disability insurance, umbrella coverage. These are all things that are really important, because no one tells you got to protect your assets, in some way, for sure, to think about that. And then really it's about living below your means. And that's what I always tell them. That's the best advice I would say, is live below your means. And actually, if you have a lot of debt, don't look at it as more of, these are challenges, but that I can get I can do this. And you really have to have a plan. You can't just make assumptions that, it'll just pay itself off over time. I mean, and this is where, whether it be Susie Orman, Dave Ramsey, any of those financial, like listen to their podcasts, read their books. They give a lot of great information about how to set up an Excel sheet, how to like set up a plan to know how to pay down your debts. But, definitely, I don't get me started. I go on and on. Yeah.
Well, it's something that they don't teach.
No.
Right.
And it's so important because you're going from making 50 grand to tripling it.
Right.
And you just don't know. They go and, buy the big house and they're living above their means.
Right. Because what is your real estate agent going to tell you is buy the most expensive house you can afford, and what is your financial planner going to tell you? Like, put your money into all these investments, and nobody's going to tell you like, no, like take a little
chill out a little bit.
Right. Like plan it all out. Look at your income, make a budget, like look at your fixed costs, and then start from the money remaining. Think about how you're going to pay down your loans, and think about how long you want to take to pay them down, and all those things. But definitely, and if some people enjoy that stuff, and if you don't enjoy it, then just my advice would be get a really good financial advisor who can give you that advice and who can help you with that. Because I know a lot of docs don't like to deal with that stuff. They just, they work, and the last thing they want to think about is investments and stocks and retirement plans and all that. That's okay. That's fine. Just find a really good financial advisor that can give you good advice. And I can assure you, if you ask your colleagues, they all have someone that they can recommend for you that has helped them. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time. If anyone wanted to reach out to you, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
I would say by email probably would be the best way to get a hold of me.
All right. And I'll link that into the description.
Okay.
And then you said you do some of the speaking events and all that?
Yeah, I do. I definitely do some public speaking. I have been blessed with the opportunity to speak at some of the Orange County Medical Association events around self-compassion, burnout. And then now I do more of the leadership coaching. So I've been able to I'm going to actually probably do an upcoming talk around how to be an empathic leader, and stuff like that.
Cool.
So those are some of my interests for sure.
So someone can just email you and you'll let them know when your next event is going on.
Definitely. And my last advice would be just take the time to breathe and be self-compassionate. Again, self-compassion has been my big theme lately, because again, we're the hardest on ourselves. And I would say that, really when you hear that voice, to really, if you're going through something hard, whether it be a divorce, whether it be some adverse outcome, whether it be something, my advice would be talk to yourself like you talk to a friend. I learned that from Kristen Neff, who has written a bunch of books on self-compassion. But definitely just say, and I realize I take a step back and I say, okay, if I was my best friend, what would I tell myself? Because I know what I'm telling myself right now. If I told that to my best friend, I would have no friends. You know what I mean? Like, so I take a step back, and it's really helped me get through some pretty hard times.
That's a good point.
For sure.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, thank you again. Thanks, Mark, for co-hosting. And we'll have you back in soon for our burnout.
That's right. That'd be great.
So
that sounds
that'd
good.
be interesting. Well, have a great day, Dr. Lee.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you guys for tuning in to this episode of the Doc Lounge Podcast, Provider's Perspective series with Dr. Lee. If you're interested in being a guest on the Doc Lounge Podcast, go to www.pacificcompanies.com.